Hello, everybody. I'm Polly Pullar, and I'm a writer and photographer. And as I said, I live in Highland, Perthshire. And it's absolutely my greatest pleasure to have another chance to speak to the wonderful, young, extremely successful naturalist writer, Stephen Rutt. Good evening, Stephen. A very warm welcome. How are you?
Hello, Polly. I'm well, thanks. And a warm welcome back on this really cold and miserable rainy day in rural Bedfordshire.
So you've had this heat wave, though, I take it, like we all have?
Yeah, we've had a monumental May. It's been swelteringly hot every day, and it's rather killed all the bee orchids that were growing in the garden here.
Oh, bee orchids. I'm very jealous. That's fantastic.
Yes.
Now, I'm
I
just going to tell people a few things about tonight. We have our chat box on the right-hand side, and if anybody's new to Zoom, all you have to do is just type your question, and I will be sort of looking everywhere for questions throughout Stephen's talk, and hopefully we'll be able to deal with some of these questions as we are going along. So that's the main thing, and as I say, we just have to hope the broadband holds out. So tonight we're going to be talking mostly about, Stephen, your wonderful book, The Seafarers. And I think it would be really good if you could start off and give people a little resume and background to that fabulous project.
Okay, so in 2015, I went to volunteer at North Bird Observatory as a voluntary assistant warden. I'd been living in London for the last 18 months and really having a truly horrible time of it. I couldn't wait to leave. So I was single, I was coming up to the end of my tenancy and had a job I couldn't wait to leave. So I quit and then thought, better find something to do. So I answered this advert online for North Bird Observatory for volunteer wardens. And they came back and said, yeah, you can do 2 months, you can do March and April. And I was delighted about that. 2 months became 7. They basically couldn't get rid of me. And in that time, I became sort of back to my normal self, less stressed, less harried, less anxious. All the things that London had made me as a person just sort of melted away on this place, North Ronaldsay, which is the northernmost of the Orkney Islands and a really fabulous place for birdwatching. When I went there, I was has a reputation for rare birds, rare exciting birds from parts of Europe, Siberia, America. And these were what I was really looking forward to seeing, as well as the migrant birds. But we had such a rubbish spring. The weather was terrible. The summer weather was terrible. And these birds didn't turn up. Now, North Ronaldsay is 3 miles long and 1 mile wide. So you learn to deal with what you've got rather than what you want. And what we did have was an absolute ton of seabirds. We had about 130 pairs of black guillemots breeding on the Rocky Island coastline. It's about 400 full miles, 4,000 Arctic terns. And I fell in love with seabirds. And I'd not really considered seabirds for a long period of time in my life. I'd seen them off the coast of Cornwall. I've been on pelagic trips. I've been on boats out of the coast to see them. But there was something sort of quite peripheral but exotic for that. And it wasn't until I was there on North Ronaldsay, living among them, that I properly fell in love with them. And then I left North Ron. I moved down to Essex to start studying for my MA. And that was fine. I was still better than living in London, but I began to really missed seeing all the seabirds. So the project was born out of that desire to go back round the British Isles seeing the seabirds. So I went around to Shetland, Orkney, Northumberland, and Skomer off the coast of Pembrokeshire in Wales. And really, it was a tremendously fabulous time doing that. It rained on me about 4 times in the entirety of the fieldwork. And I managed to lose myself in lots of old bird books and like authors such as Ronald Lachlan and James Fisher, and it's just had a lovely time doing it.
It's a fabulous book because what you didn't just mention this. Firstly, sorry, we've got internet issues here going on. Sorry, you didn't mention that you really were in a very stressed state when you went to North Ronaldsay, and you and I had this conversation because I had a similar experience in London and needed to get away. And North Ronaldsay, I mean, it's such a remote place, but you said that it made a seabird-shaped hole in your heart. And I absolutely loved that piece in your book. I thought that was just so lovely. So when you got to North Romsey, you began to unwind, and all this awful stress that you were feeling in London just melted away, didn't it?
Yes, it did. And I was the only volunteer there at the beginning. So there was me and an observatory of about 5 members of staff on an island with a population of about 50. And I found in London that my horizon became the street, and that was a very narrow and sort of constricting way to see. And then obviously you can't hear the birds for the traffic noise. And I lived on the Heathrow flight path, which is horrible. The sound of planes always made me slightly anxious. I stopped going outside, and then on North Romsey, all there is to do is go outside, and that was really, really helpful for me.
Yeah, I think you should describe North Romsey just a little bit more, because it is so unique, because it has this dike that runs around the whole island, doesn't it?
Yeah, the North Romsey Sheep Dyke is, I think, the longest protected monument in Scotland.
It's 7 miles, isn't it, in total, all the way around? Yeah.
Yeah, so although it's 3 miles, the island is 3 miles long and 1 mile wide. The coastline is 14 miles long, and it's there to stop the sheep from coming into the fields. So the sheep have adapted to eat seaweed, and if they get into the fields, which is what every sheep in its existence wants to do, is be where it's not supposed to be, they get copper poisoning, I believe. It has this really rare breed of sheep. I think there's about, I can't remember how many there are on the island, but it's a really endangered breed.
2,000 to 3,000, I think.
2,000 to 3,000, yeah. And it's a really ancient breed as well. I think it came over the Norse when they were in Orkney as well. You have this coastline which with a wall on it, and the rest of the island, there's 2 beaches and a lot of rocky boulders. It's a rocky coastline. It's not really. There's a couple of cliffs, but they're not particularly big at any point. I think about 20 meters big. The biggest hill on the island is 20 meters, so it's a very flat island as well. And it's amazing because it's not especially picturesque. It's not beautiful, but it is stunning. There's an elemental wildness to it that is really powerful. And the beaches are beautiful. The white sandy beaches of Orkney are just the most incredible coastal landscape I think I've ever seen.
Yeah, I think it's a gorgeous place. But you then went to Shetland, so you've had, which is another wonderful place and fantastic for healing the soul when you're troubled. And so how did you find Shetland, and what did you see there?
Shetland was great. The first thing you sort of note is when you get the flight over. I got the flight from Edinburgh to the airport at Sunborough. Sunborough's just back from the Sunborough Head seabird colony, so there comes a point when you look out the window and there's just a gannet flying past, and you don't necessarily want to be in a plane watching a gannet fly past. It's a bit close for comfort. So Sunborough Head is an amazing seabird colony. It has huge cliffs, big lighthouse, puffins everywhere, guillemots everywhere, razorbills, all the skuas cruising around looking for trouble, gannets, and that's great. So that's at the southern end of Shetland, which feels a bit Orcadian to me. It's very sort of rolling and grassy, and then the further up the archipelago you get, the more moorish it gets. There's more moorland and bigger cliffs. And Escherness, halfway up the west side, is an old volcano, and the rocks are black. And I went there in a storm, and it was truly like nothing else I've ever experienced. But then Unst, I think Unst is possibly vying with North Romsey for my favourite island. It was an incredibly peaceful place. And at the far end, you get Hermanus, which is an amazing great skua colony. There was one point on the sea lock just before you get to Hermanus, we saw 100, I think it was about 150 great skuas all having a wash, which is terrifying because the one thing great skuas do is if you walk near their nests, they come for your head. And they are the size of a large gull, and they have chunky feet, which they hold down like boxes and sort of go at your head. So they can be a very painful bird as well.
So monks is their nickname, isn't it? And they are really sort of kleptoparasites. So that's another fascinating insight. And in your book, you talk quite a lot about that sort of thing and about how they behave, turning puffins and other birds inside out. Yeah. I mean, they are real pirates of the air, aren't they?
Yes,
And
they
you
are.
went to Musa. Now that's a fabulous. I really enjoyed that description of going there because I had also been there, and I felt you brought that episode so alive. It was just perfect. Talk about the stormy petrels.
Yeah, so you get the boat over at 10 o'clock, and 10 o'clock on Shetland in early June isn't dark. But you have to wait till the darkness because storm petrels are nocturnal birds. So you get the boat over and you walk down to the Brock, which is a 2,000-year-old dry stone structure that would have been lived in and used. And the storm petrels, they nest in the walls of the Brock because there's just gaps within the rocks. And they're very vulnerable to predation. So they need islands where there's no cats, stoats, rats, anything that can sort of, fish with a paw to grab a chick out. So yeah, standing there at 11 o'clock, half 11, I think it was, the clouds had obscured the moon, so it was all perfectly dark. And then you start hearing this song, and they have the most bizarre, borderline indescribable song that I think any bird has. It's sort of, it goes like that, but much nicer. It's really really spellbinding, really magical to hear this strange sound, and then you start seeing them flying in, and each storm petrel is the size of a sparrow, which is kind of amazing for a bird that lives out to sea in the crashing waves, only comes near land at night, to be the size of a sparrow. And they fly off, they spend the winter in the middle of the Atlantic as well, which is, birds will never cease to amaze me.
There's something moth-like about them and slightly ethereal, isn't there?
Yeah, to describe it, I think I describe them as being bat-like, but also mouse-like, and then you say moth-like. They're so otherworldly. They're just like other things, but not other things at the same time. And their plumage is black as well, so the view you get of them is of them sort of jinking in on really sort of erratic flight paths, blurring in the darkness. It's great. I love them. I want to go back.
Yes, I'm sure. You make me want to go back too. I mean, the Broch and the atmosphere of that at night is really quite something, and that eerie sound that they make. I mean, it's one of these things that's life-affecting, isn't it? And from your book, it comes across that it really did affect you like that. Yeah,
it does. And then there's also the thing that, because you can actually go inside the Broch. So the Broch has two walls, and there's a staircase that runs up between them, so you can stand on the top of the Broch. And then you can look out over to Sombra Head where the lighthouse is, and you see the light blinking. And then you look over towards the other Broch, I think it's Burrell and Broch on the mainland opposite, and just think that this is what people would have experienced 2,000 years ago when this Broch was built.
Incredible.
Yeah. Obviously not the lighthouse. But yeah.
One of the things I really enjoyed in your book was the way you explored two particular great naturalists, James Fisher and Ronald Lachlan. Yeah. And I'd really like you to tell us a bit more about that. I hadn't read all those incredible stories about them, and you obviously did a lot of research. And I wanted to ask you particularly, out of those two men, which is the one you would really have liked to have met?
Oh, wow. James Fisher has the most incredible breadth of learning of any sort of ornithologist I know of. It was his book, The Shell Bird Book, that I found in a secondhand bookshop. Has this lovely, classic 60s cover. And I ignored the fact that it was published by Shell Oil Company. And in it, I was flicking through it, and then he has this picture where this section where he analyses the Seafarers, the Anglo-Saxon poem. And then he sort of dates it based on the birds in the description to being off Bass Rock in the middle of May in whenever it was written. And I can't think of another sort of living ornithologist who writes so capably about prehistoric avian life, what's currently present in the British Isles and where it's breeding and, its conservation. And then also to sort of chuck in a lovely bit of analysis about an Anglo-Saxon poem. Like, that's sort of staggering.
But he did his research was really important, and he did lots of work and editing the new Naturalist series, that fabulous series as well, didn't he?
Yes, he did. He helped set that up, I believe.
He absolute sort of, that's a treasure of a series, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, and his contribution to it in written form was the Fulmar, which is a massive work on the Fulmar, which is my personal favourite seabird. And in it, he says, I've needed no more spur than the ghost grey bird and the grey-green seas or something. It's lovely. It's really, really lovely. But Ronald Lockley
was a bit of a nutcase, wasn't he? I mean, Lockley sounded to me like a bit of a nutcase. I mean, some of the things he did were awful.
Yes, yes.
With shearwaters, he did terrible things with shearwaters.
Oh yes, that. So back in the days before we really understood bird migration and movement, he would do things like he would take shearwaters out of burrows, give them rings. So this is in the early days of bird ringing. Take them off to Start Point in Devon or Venice or Boston in America, release them, and then sort of time how long it took them to get back, which is sort of fascinating because often they did it really quickly. The bird released in Start Point in Devon was back in Skokholm on the same day, I think. The one from Boston didn't make it. Quite a lot died in transit because it's not really great for a shearwater to be in a cage on public transport for very long. It's sort of amazing. This is kind of like really early, GPS transmitter work, trying to work out, how long it takes them to fly and the routes they take. The problem is, because obviously it's just a ring, he doesn't know the route it's taken. So it's kind of slightly useless. But it is fascinating in itself, I think.
But you also, you never made it to Skokholm. I've never been there either. And that's one of the Welsh islands, isn't it?
Yes, yeah.
And his rabbit breeding program there was another extraordinary fantasy. I mean, I would like you to tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so he bred rabbits as a sort of money-making scheme. He had a lot of sort of slightly mad money-making schemes, and breeding rabbits was one of them. And I think there was a massive crash in the price of rabbit skins about the time he was just about to sort of make it big as a rabbit breeder. So yeah, that didn't quite pay off. But he did write The Private Life of the Rabbit, which is what became... what's it called? Watership Down, that's it. So he wrote the book that inspired the writing Watership Down as well. So he had a great many interests, he did.
And Richard Adams was a good friend of his, wasn't he?
Yes, he was. And he wrote Lockley into one of his novels as well. I can't remember which one. But.
No, you talk a lot about the dreaded plastics, and that I found very moving because you were obviously coming across all sorts of horrors with plastics. You were witnessing how many seabirds actually have plastics inside them. This is something that's going to be very difficult to sort out, isn't it? You have very strong views on it, like me, like all of us.
Yeah, I think the Anthropocene for me is best sort of defined as being the age of plastic. If you take the idea of the Anthropocene as being the period on Earth where we've had most direct impact, then for me it's plastic, which doesn't follow the natural sort of rules of life. It doesn't decay, really. It doesn't die. It just stays. So for me, we are living in the age of plastic. And there are good things we're doing about it. I think it's no longer acceptable for people to throw litter, although I think actually recent evidence from people having barbecues in parks post-lockdown has sort of disproved that slightly. The carrier bag, 5p for a carrier bag scheme, I think has been a massive help as well. But quite often it's just stuff that already exists in the environment. So a lot of gannet nests are on Noop Head, which is where I particularly noticed it, on the island of Westray in Orkney. You can see that they've weaved bits of fishing rope, broken bits of fishing net into their nests. And there was a study done on the island of Grassholm, which is again off the Pembrokeshire coast, where they discovered that plastics in gannet nests are actually trapping and killing the chicks. And there is, again, numbers run out of my head really easy, but they did take a couple of sample nests, soak them in bleach, and counted all the bits of plastic that was there, and they extrapolated that over the amount of gannet nests on the island, and it was like several tons of plastic on this uninhabited island in the middle of the Bristol Channel, Celtic Sea, sorry, which is horrific.
I've got a rather good question for you, which is slightly off what we're talking about. But Hayley Anderton has asked, is there a specific bird that has defined your lockdown, Stephen?
Wow, great question. Black caps have been everywhere. I love black caps. They're a small grey Sylvia warbler with a nice black cap, and they have the most incredible song. And where I am currently, there's been one in the garden pretty much all spring, and it's been singing at ear-splitting levels of volume. They're known as the Northern Nightingale because they're pretty much as good as a nightingale, but you get them in the north. So that might well have been it, although I've been doing the same walk pretty much every day for the last 2 and a bit months, or however long lockdown's been. And I was seeing the same things, and I thought I knew where everything was. And then one day last week, I flushed a little owl out of a tree. It flew into another tree and looked down and glared at me with the most intense, vivid yellow eyes. And they have a very good frown. It looked really unhappy to see me. But it was a great reminder that no matter how well I think I know the landscape around here, I don't. Not at all. I had no idea there were little owls there.
So you not only done this fabulous book on the Seafarers, which has got so many facets to it, because you not only talk about plastic, you also raise the issue of EU money that's no longer going to be spent. And when you were on Compensate, that really hit home to you, didn't it?
Yes, it did, yeah.
Was that because they had everything there had been... Just tell me a little bit more about that.
So on Compensate, the RSPB have a cottage. The door's open, you can just wander in. And it looked like something you might see in a sort of post-disaster film. There were things hanging off the wall, there was a rusting bed. There were the faded, clearly it had been a notice board, but they'd taken everything off, and it was just the sort of faded outlines of where sunlight had hit. And a visitor book that you turned a couple of pages and you went back 4 or 5 years. And I think it is the lack of money that there is to spend on places like this. And Compensate is extremely difficult to get to anyway. It's off the DNS Peninsula on the east of Orkney mainland. And yeah, I really worry about the future of these. So Compensate is great for corncrakes, which breed on the island, I believe. And without EU subsidies the corncrake relies on old-fashioned farming methods, basically. It can't take the modern ways. So yeah, without EU or decent levels of funding to make people farm in the old ways, then this species doesn't have a great future. And even on a place like Compensate, you can feel that. And yeah, it was a slightly sort of haunting look into what the future might be for other places as well.
Yes, I think I was very keen to stress to people who haven't read this wonderful book that there are so many different aspects to it, because not only are you having a major love affair and learning a lot about the seabirds and telling the reader a lot about them, but you also do raise these issues like plastics, like the loss of money and how it's going to be so difficult to protect these things in the future. And I think that was really important. Before we move to one of your other projects, I would like to just... I was very moved by the chapter on the kittiwakes in Newcastle. I mean, that's an extraordinary thing, isn't it?
It's incredible.
Kittiwakes in the middle of the city.
Yeah. I think it's the only seabird colony in the middle of the city anywhere in the world, particularly in a city that's not even on the coast. It's a couple of miles inland, isn't it? But it's best seen at the Baltic Art Gallery. They have a viewing platform right at the top of the building, which is really high up, and I'm slightly vertiginous. I get vertigo quite easily when I look over big yawning drops. That's why I'm not very good in sea cliffs, actually. And they nest on... It's got the big Baltic letters that are just sort of embossed out, and they nest on top of there. And it's incredible, because this is a sound I'm used to hearing, in remote places. And then there it is in the middle of Newcastle, where you got the sounds of sirens, all the city noise. You can see St James's Park and the old castle and the cathedral, and then there's just these seabirds right here. And it's also, that colony in the middle of Newcastle is the only kittiwake colony that's not declining. I think I'm right in saying that. I think it's the only non-declining kittiwake colony in Britain, which is baffling but great.
It's just strange the way we tolerate, or people tolerate, the kittiwakes in the middle of Newcastle, but yet we're so intolerant of gulls, aren't we? I mean, people hate herring gulls and blackback gulls, and it's such a shame because they're only there because of our mess and litter, whereas the kittiwake isn't a scavenger. I mean, it's such a different sort of bird.
Yeah, you sort of feel like if all gulls didn't go for your chips, then they might be tolerated.
You say that bit where you say the kittiwake loves fish but not chips.
Yes.
But you also make some comment about the fact it's slender and elegant, which is probably something to do with not eating chips as well, maybe.
Yes, possibly. I think in the book I actually say that I'm sort of indifferent towards the vast majority of gulls. I'd like to recount that. Last summer, just after the book was published, I was walking back from a morning at work, and I noticed this gull chick on the ground in a cul-de-sac. It was lying under a car, and there were cats walking by, and I was just like, oh, that's weird. It was lunchtime. I was hungry. And then about halfway through my lunch, I realised that shouldn't have been there, and went back out with a shoebox, and spent about several hours, on the phone to the SSPCA, trying to get them to come and rescue this gull chick. It was a lesser blackback gull chick. It was about this big, and I was sort of having to run at cats to scare them off because I didn't want them having this chick. And eventually, about 4 hours of me standing in a cul-de-sac looking at this gull chick, SSPCA rang me back to say, we're going to come and take it. Can you hold it for us? So yeah, I took it into my shower, and it had the run of the shower for about 2 hours while this person came down to collect it. And you can't be indifferent or apathetic to gulls once you've had one in your shower for a couple of hours. It was a lesser blackback gull, and they're really hated in Dumfries for all the reasons people hate gulls. They dive bomb people, they nick your chips, they poo everywhere. But yeah, I can't see them that way now. I just see it as that little chick that was in my shower for 2 hours.
Now, I've got a very good question here from Julian Hoffman, which will bring up, hopefully, the wonderful subject of the men of Ness. So his question is, were there any strong cultural connections to seabirds still existing that you discovered, still in existence that you discovered? So, of course.
Yeah, okay, so the men of Ness. So the Ness is the top peninsula on the Isle of Lewis. And they have a cultural habit of every summer it used to be a rowboat. It's now a proper boat, or a boat with an engine, rather, I should say. And they sail off to Sula Skier, which is a rock in the middle of nowhere. It's basically just a gannetry. And for 2 weeks, the men of Ness kill, pluck, salt. I think it's about 2,000 guga, which are baby gannets. It's a local delicacy, and it stems back from the time when on the Isle of Lewis and around Ness you would need these birds to survive. So yeah, this is a tradition that still goes today. They still speak Gaelic on the island. You're not allowed to speak English on Sula Skier when you're involved in the Guga hunt. Yeah, I don't like it, but it's such a long-standing cultural tradition, and the gannet is one of the few seabirds that's actually increasing. So I think conservation of cultures can be indeed as important as conservation of nature. So I sort of don't mind that it continues. There's a really excellent documentary on it, whose name escapes me, but I write about it in the book. That is really worth watching.
Yeah, I went to interview them a few years ago, and I really was keen to go out and see what they did, but they wouldn't take me because they don't take women with red hair because they're supposed to be witches. So,
okay.
But I did try Guga, and I have to say, I think it's the most disgusting thing I have ever eaten in my entire life.
Yeah, most of the reviews of Guga say that. So. There's a great book on.
Sorry, Stephen.
So there's a great book on the Guga hunt by Donald S. Murray, which is well worth reading, called The Guga Hunters. So.
Yeah, it's a brilliant book too. So you spent quite a lot of time doing these islands, and they've made a real mark on you. But now you've got another very exciting project on the go, and you've just had the most fabulous commission from the Wigtown Book Festival company.
Yes. So we're doing this thing called the Salt Marsh Library. It's part of the SNH's, Scottish Natural Heritage's Year of Seas and Coasts. And they're commissioning me to do an extended piece of writing about the Salt Marsh and about Wigtown Bay in particular, which is an incredible place, and also an incredible place to get away from the book festival when there's too many people there, because it's just down the hill. I went there last autumn after doing our event, and I saw a peregrine falcon by a dead sheep eating a wader, and a whole bunch of crows looking confusedly on like they didn't know what to go for. So
I went down to the bird hide with Jim Crumley and saw a kingfisher wrapped up in a sunbeam. It was absolutely, there was only one patch of sun and this kingfisher was in it. So it is a fabulous place, but there's so much to explore there, isn't there, between the different geese, the wildfowl, and what else, all the rare plants. I mean, it's a really important habitat that's ever changing.
Yeah, it is. And it's interesting because salt marsh forms by an interruption to flow. So in the Solway, which is just this massive expanse of water, when you get interruptions to there, like mud banks that sort of don't get washed away, and then you start getting these plants like samphire and glasswort that start to sort of colonize these areas, and they can take the salt, and they can take that sort of ever-changing 12 hours a day of mud, 12 hours a day of salt water. They sort of form as an interruption to flow, which is something I'm very fond of. I presume you've seen the NASA picture of the Solway from space.
Extraordinary, weird, isn't it?
I love the feathery way that the sediment has of coming down the Solway as well. So what I love about it is that the environment for me is there's just stories everywhere, much like a library is. So the Salt Marsh Library might well start in space.
But I mean, you're going to have such a job trying to work out what to leave out, because there's so much, isn't there? I mean, you'll be people, the history of the people, and the wild fowling. I can't pronounce that. All the geese, the history, the Wigtown martyrs. What else will you be thinking of?
Oh, well, the Wigtown martyrs. It's such a moving story of people being horrible to people just for their religion. I found the martyr stone very very moving out on the Merse like that. It's a huge topic, and it's a huge area as well. It's Britain's largest local nature reserve, which is a fact I love. I would like myself to be Britain's largest local something at some point. There's just so much potential to do.
Why is it called the Inks?
Sorry? Why
is it called the Inks?
That is a question that Elizabeth Tyndall would be really good at answering. She is the local ranger who I will be working with in the researching of the Salt Marsh Library, and I think she's heavily involved in part of the project as well. And I think she was due to be here, but
I think she was enough. Yes. So that's very exciting too. So wonderful. But you now can expand on the work you did on, I mean, you were extraordinary last year. You did 2 books in 1 year. I mean, you're not even 28 when you're doing all these books. Just incredible. I think you are now 28, aren't you?
I am now 28.
Amazing. 2 books, award-winning books. And but I chatted to you last year about wintering, and I think we should have a wee chat about that as well. So, but you can use the facts that you had from that for this too, not because of the geese.
Yes, and it's going to be interesting because in wintering, I was sort of heavily focusing on the inner Solway around Dumfries. So it's going to be interesting to compare it to further up the Solway into Galloway. Marshes I've been birding for half my life now, and I know that as I'm only just 28, that's not a particularly long life. But because I grew up in East Anglia, particularly in Suffolk, Salt Marsh has been sort of my premier birding habitat for so long. I think I write in wintering that the habitat of my heart is marshy. I just love marshes. I find it hypnotic how they change. I find them very peaceful. As an intense, shy introvert, I've always sought out these landscapes which are where there's more birds than people, preferably with hide in them as well. So I'm just hugely looking forward to it.
Your type of nature writing is very, it's very, I don't know the word I would use, but it's very captivating, and it's easy to understand. You use beautiful language, but you don't lose your reader in huge amounts of too much. It's just perfect. And I think you were very fortunate, weren't you, to do a course down in we talked about James Canton.
Yes. Yes.
Writing.
Yeah. So James Canton was still is the tutor on Essex University's Wild Writing, Literature and Landscape MA course.
What a wonderful course to be able to do.
Yeah. It's great. It gives you time and space to properly think about how we respond to nature and the environment and places around you. It finally made me read Sebald, The Rings of Saturn. That's not why I took the course, but that was a useful thing I got from it. I had such a lovely time. Colchester is a lovely place. It's not quite as wild as Dumfries, but they are very similar actually, because you sort of slightly hill town with town on a hill rather, next to big flat expanse of marsh and mud. When I moved to Dumfries from Colchester, I felt right at home. But yeah, it's a great course. I thoroughly recommend it to anyone thinking about studying on literature.
Who are the authors that inspire you, really? The nature writers that inspire you, both old and modern?
Aldo Leopold is my absolute favourite. He was writing in 1949 in Wisconsin, and he has such a clear-sighted view of ecology and such a plain but poetic way of expressing it. I really love the Sand County Almanac by him. I think that's great. You love it too, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely love it. But it's rather frightening to read it now, because everything he says has actually come to the fore. I mean, we're right in the middle of all the predictions he made. He had such foresight, didn't he?
Yeah. I also love J.A. Baker. You can't live in Essex and not love J.A. Baker. It's against the law. When I have moments, I think we all have moments where we sort of think that we've forgotten how to write. H is for Hook by Helen MacDonald, The Outrun by Amy Liptrot. These are books I go back to just to sort of, remind myself of what language can do.
Have you read Patrick Lorre's Native, Life in a Vanishing Landscape?
Not yet. I will do.
Yes, I can't recommend that enough. It's probably going to take a bit of beating for my book of this year. It's a really lovely, lovely book.
Yeah.
Now, I've got somebody who has said here that the inks is sometimes called that because of the anoxic layer that looks like ink a few centimetres below the surface. That's one explanation anyway. However, it's thought that it actually comes from the Scottish inches, meaning home or flat land near the water, or that water comes over. So in Perth, there are the North Inch and the South Inch. So that's probably, it's interesting how these things change, isn't it?
Yes, and there's the Inch Marsh in Speyside as well.
Yeah, which I go to quite often. Yeah. Where they're thinking of bringing back cranes. There's something else.
Oh, cool.
You would enjoy that.
Yeah, I would. I love seeing them in East Norfolk when they roost at Hickling Broad, and you get about 40 of them just spiraling through the sky at dusk. It's hypnotic.
Wonderful
and the sound is incredible. Yeah.
And have you been following egrets round too? You must have seen them a bit on your travels. Yes, they're spreading, aren't they?
Yes. I've heard rumours that they nested in Gretna last year, but I don't think anyone quite knows that for sure. But yeah, they've. I was really surprised. I hadn't realised how far they'd spread. So when I left Essex for Dumfries, I sort of sought out Little Egret and said goodbye. You were the last Little Egret I'll see for a while. Got to Dumfries and they're everywhere. I needn't have worried. But actually, I'm sort of working on a chapter now on the current book I'm writing on egrets, because I'm currently working on summer wildlife and climate change, which is an interesting endeavour when you can't go outside. And egrets have spread out through the country. They first bred in the mid-90s in Brownsea Island in Dorset, and now they're everywhere. and it's an amazing climate change success story. One of the few ones that we've got.
One of the things that I found I was troubled, I think like you were, was your visit to the Farne Islands. And we'll go back to that in the Seafarers. And you go to the Farne Islands where there's masses of people on the boat, masses of people infringing on a very small space, which is really so important for these birds' successful breeding. You found that difficult too, didn't you?
I did. I found the Farne Islands a very troubling place. I mean, it's important to say that many people go there, many people love it, and that's fine. But I was troubled because, I mean, these are small islands, and there was just waves and waves of people coming off the boats onto them. A ranger told me that they have 50,000 people there every year, and people don't necessarily know how to behave around birds. So when you get off the boat onto Inner Farne, there are Arctic tern nests all up the slipway, and an Arctic tern will come and attack you if you get near its nest. But I saw people standing by nests on purpose so they could get the adult to come down and attack them, just so they could get a really good selfie. And this was one of the few times it was raining on my trip. It was actually quite a cold afternoon, and that egg needs to be sat on by the adult. So otherwise it will get cold and the chick will die in the egg. And yeah, I found seeing things like that to be quite stressful. And it had the slight air of feeling a bit like a zoo, an open-air zoo of seabirds, just because they are generally right in your face on the Farne Islands. And also, I double-checked this earlier today, it's 75 quid to do Inner Farne and Staple Island, which is another one of the Farne Islands. It's 40 quid in boats and 35 quid to the National Trust to go on these islands. So, yeah, I just found it a really troubling place. Too many people and it's too much money, which is a sort of contradiction in terms, I think. But, yeah. I know.
There should be places where people don't go. Would you agree with that? Do you think that we expect to go and infringe on wildlife all the time? Do you not think what do you?
Yeah, wildlife certainly needs space, and particularly seabirds as well, which are, on the whole, doing terribly. They need their space. And it's true that it's only three of the Farne Islands you can visit. The rest of them are just set aside for seabirds, but even so, it still felt uncomfortable to me.
There is that happy story of Coquette Island, is it Coquette Island? Is that how you pronounce it?
Coquette, I believe.
Coquette, yeah.
I don't know. That's
Island.
Yes, that is set aside for seabirds, and it's as it should be, because it's our only sort of breeding colony, England's only breeding colony of roseate terns, which are like, I mean, the way I describe it is that sort of common terns are lovely. Arctic terns are common terns made lovelier, and a roseate tern is an Arctic tern that's died and gone to heaven and been converted into some sort of angel, because they are pure white. Their wings and tail are so elegant. They're just a really fantastic seabird. So I think one warden lives on the island, and sort of solely responsible for sort of looking after all these pairs of roseate terns that are breeding there.
Would you go there if you got a chance?
I mean, I would love to do the wardening there. My fiance probably wouldn't let me. But yeah, I'd love to do a boat trip around it. Sorry?
Do you see yourself doing more time working as a warden or a ranger?
I would love to. I don't think I would ever actually get a job as it, because I don't have the right qualifications. I've got 2 degrees in English. There's not great qualifications for getting into outdoor jobs.
It's a shame that passion doesn't come into it, isn't it? Because if you need passion for that would have given you a qualification for the job. Yeah. So there must be a lot of other islands you want to go to, because I mean, we have such an amazing wealth of islands all around the British coastline, don't we?
Yes, I'd like to get back to Skocum, which was where Britain's first bird observatory was set up by Ronald in the 1930s. And I'd like to go there, and I'd like to apologise for not having been able to get there during the book, because you can only stay there for sort of 4 days at a time, and I had no time to take off due to my work, my museum work there. So I'd love to go back to Skokholm. I'd love to go to Skokholm and apologise, and also enjoy being in the place that Ronald Lachlan set up, Britain's first bird observatory. I'd like to go to Cape Clear in Ireland. I'd love to go to Barra and the Hebrides, where the plane lands on the beach.
That's great.
Yeah, that's the sun just looks so good. I'd like to go to the Isle of May as well, in the Firth of Forth.
I've spent quite a lot of time on the Isle of May, and it is absolutely gorgeous. As long as you get the weather, it's like heaven. Absolutely. And the grey seals there are so exciting as well. You can have great fun stalking seals. You didn't go to Fair Isle, did you? Or you haven't been yet? Or
no, that's a good point. Yeah, I'd love to go to Fair Isle. The weird thing from North Ronaldsay is that you can see Fair Isle pretty much every day, because Fair Isle's a big rocky island. The irony is that Fair Isle can basically never see North Ronaldsay, because North Ronaldsay is so flat. They can sometimes see the lighthouse, but it's very rare. But yeah, Fair Isle is the premier destination for British birdwatching in terms of seabirds and migratory birds and rare birds as well. Yeah, I'd love to go.
Yeah. Now, I've got some little notes here. Alison Mingis has very helpfully told us that the documentary that you mentioned, The Guga Hunters of Ness, is made by Mike Day. So,
and it's available on Vimeo, I think.
It was very good. I think it was on television quite recently. There was a Gaelic program on Alapa had something on the Guga Hunters as well. And Suzanne Connolly has said you really need to go to Burren in Ireland and research the woodcock.
I would love to go to the Burren. It looks an incredible place to go. For anyone who doesn't know, it's this sort of incredible landscape of limestone pavements and all sorts of rare plants, and I think rare butterflies as well there as well.
Yes, I've never been there. I went there in September. I've never actually been there in the spring, and I think probably May must be fantastic, and when the horse comes out too.
And actually, that reminds me that I've been to North Uist in May for the birds, but I'd love to come back later in the summer when the maca is flowering.
Yeah, and when all the waders are there too. I mean, all the breeding waders, the Dunlin and the... So tell us a little bit more about your new book, because that's quite a project that you're working on now. I mean, you're really going for it.
Yes, I like working. So it's a book about summer wildlife and climate change, and it's inspired by seeing how birds are sort of reacting to the changing climate. So it starts off with me seeing a blackcap in Liverpool in January in my mate's garden on a really freezing day. And a blackcap, it's a summer visitor here, but they have started in recent years wintering here because of the conditions are better. But also these are blackcaps from Eastern Europe, East Germany, etc., coming over here because we feed the birds. And that's enabling them, that's giving them a food source that enables them to spend the winter here. And we're actually changing speciation in blackcaps because the populations that used to meet on the wintering grounds in Spain and North Africa don't meet anymore. So the British breeding ones still migrate, but the ones from further east come over here. So these two populations are never meeting. So they're showing some signs of divergence in their plumage and also length of bill and length of feathers in their wing and things like that. So I found that really interesting. And then it reminded me of a chiff-chaff I saw a couple of winters ago in a blizzard in Cornwall in February as well. And then I started to piece together that these are summer birds that have adapted to be able to spend our winters here. Because you shouldn't be able to start a book about summer wildlife in a snowstorm in February. That's just wrong. So yeah, it's inspired by how birds are adapting to our changing climate. But it's not just about birds. I was hoping for it to have natterjack toads in it. Obviously, I'm in Bedfordshire, not in Dumfries. And the local population of natterjack toads in Bedfordshire is in a closed reserve. I was hoping to have marsh fritillaries in Dorset, but can't get there anymore. So yeah, it's proving adventurous for the mind, at least.
Does it have a title, your new book?
Well, the working title is called Summering. None of my books have a name that was given to it by me. So if someone else would like to come up with a better title for it, I'm open to all sorts of suggestions.
And it'd be the same publisher, will it?
Yes, Elliot Thompson as well.
And they do a lovely job. I just want to show everybody now the Seafarers, and it's due out in paperback, isn't it? Yes, we've got it. That's great.
Yeah, came out on the 4th in compact, bendable, ideal for a field rucksack. Yeah.
Lovely.
Cover, yeah.
So, and I really recommend that everybody should get a copy of it, because it really is not only incredibly informative, but it's very moving as well. So for anyone on Twitter, Elliot and Thompson would love you to share your pictures of seabirds and coastlines there with us, and find us on, the details are on the website here, and they'd love us to see, what do they say? Sorry, I'm struggling to read this. Show us your seafarers, hashtag show us your seafarers. Yes. So that's rather a nice project. Are you a photographer too?
I used to be. I currently can't afford to replace my camera, but I take pictures with my mobile phone through my binoculars, which takes a lot. Yeah, it takes a lot of practice. It's very wobbly, and you get very strange looks from people, but it does work.
It does.
Yeah.
So it's quite an exciting time ahead you've got. I mean, absolutely brilliant. But I'm most excited really about this new project that you're doing with the book festival. I think that's going to be really lovely. So when will you actually be back home and back to Dumfries?
Well, as soon as the lockdown is lifted, I guess. I would very much like to be back soon. I work 4 days a week in the local museum in Dumfries. So yeah, I guess when I appear to have a job in an actual building again, and not just a job from my desk. But yeah, I've been dreaming about Dumfries, which is it's a good sign. I miss the space and the air.
It's been a good move for you, hasn't it?
Yes.
Yes. Been a very positive move. You wouldn't go back south again through choice.
No, not willingly. Pandemics aside, yeah.
Yeah, well, that's all very exciting. So for anybody that wants the book, you can get it through the Book Festival shop, which is online, and all details on the website. I'd very much like to thank Bailey Gifford, who have made these online events possible. And I'd also like to say that although they're free to join, obviously we like to pay the authors for participating, and therefore if anybody's keen to give even a small donation, this is really gratefully received by the festival company. It's very exciting having these online events, and our internet seems to have held out quite well. Yes. Stephen, I really, really wish you so much luck with all this. I'm incredibly envious of you having this lovely new project to do, and I think you're going to do it absolutely brilliantly. I gather I'm going to be able to see some of it as it goes along, am I?
Yeah, happily. Yeah, I'll show you what you want. Yeah.
Looking forward to seeing that. Now, there's a note here for me. Oh yes, Stephen's book, I've already said this, is available from the Book Festival website. Every copy bought supports the festival and keeps Stephen in birdseed, so that will be good. And Anne has put, maybe it'll help him to buy a new camera too.
Maybe, yeah.
Sorry, one last question from Fred Clute. Who decided about the title Wintering and why? And that's our last question, I think.
My wonderful editor at the wonderful Elliot and Thompson. Because I have a massive blind spot towards titles. I can't do them. I'm terrible. I did want to call it Close Season, which doesn't even work. It was a terrible semi-pun. Yeah, bad. My friend Emily Hasler came up with the title The Seafarers in a pub garden in Essex. And it's one of those things where it's sort of you hit yourself on the head because it's such an obviously brilliant title. Yeah, I don't know why I can't do titles. I just can't do them.
I think titles are very difficult, and they can mean so many different things to different people. And I think whatever title you have, somebody's going to say, "Oh, why didn't you call it that?" Or we never mentioned your father, and I see I've still got a few minutes. Your father has been very instrumental in your birding life, hasn't he?
Yes.
And you mention that a lot in your book, and in your acknowledgements. You know, your parents have helped so much you on this incredible journey.
Yes, I think he's watching, so I imagine he'll be squirming on his sofa back in Suffolk. Yeah, so it was half my life ago that on the 1st of May 2006 that I told him I wanted to go for a walk, and he took me to Minsmere on the Suffolk coast, which is the RSPB sort of major flagship reserve in Suffolk. And he was able to show me all the birds, the bitterns and the avocets and stuff like that. And I got really into it, and it wasn't until we were about to leave at dusk that we had this Chetty's warbler sing, and it was Dad's first Chetty's warbler, and he got quite excited, and then it jumped out into this scrubby little sapling. And Chetty's warblers are really shy, but they have a really loud song, so you always hear them, but you never see them. But we saw this one, and he got so excited, he dissolved in excitement, I think I say in the book. And yeah, it like me, not particularly excitable people. So that just transferred completely, and from then on I was hooked. So yeah, it's all his fault.
Well, I think we're going to produce lots of things in the next few years. Anyway, and absolutely delightful to chat to you again, and thank you so much for your time and for giving us such a wonderful, entertaining insight into seabirds and all your other things.
No worries, great to talk to you.
There's no Wigtown Wednesday next week, but we will be back on the 24th of June, which is Midsummer Night, with a special Wicker Man event featuring Robin Ince, and details will go up on the website tomorrow. Thank you very much, Stephen, from us all. Good night.
That's right. Thank you. Bye.